The alien council sat in their pristine chambers, the air thick with tension. They had never faced a problem like this before. Their society was one of order and control, their technology far beyond most species in the galaxy. But now, they found themselves dealing with a rogue element within their own ranks, someone who threatened their carefully maintained stability. Assassination had always been beneath them. They prided themselves on diplomacy, manipulation, and strategic dominance. But this was different. They needed someone who could take care of the problem swiftly, and without drawing attention. That's when they turned their gaze toward the humans. The council had heard whispers, rumors, really, about a particular human. A hitman, they said, capable of handling jobs that even the most dangerous mercenaries in the galaxy wouldn't touch. He was efficient, brutal, and most importantly, discreet. A perfect candidate for their needs. But, as always with humans, there was an air of unpredictability that made the council uneasy. Still, they had no choice. When the human hitman arrived, the council members were already nervous. He was nothing like they expected. Where they had imagined a hulking brute or perhaps a cold, calculating killer in some advanced combat suit, what stood before them was a man, calm, quiet, with an almost casual demeanor. His eyes, though, were what unsettled them the most. There was something in them, something dangerous, something they couldn't quite put their finger on. The lead council member cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure. "You come highly recommended," he said, his voice wavering slightly despite his best efforts. "This task is delicate. It must be handled with the utmost discretion." The hitman simply nodded, saying nothing, his expression unreadable. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't used to this. Every other species they had encountered had shown them the proper respect, the kind of deference their status demanded. But this human didn't seem interested in impressing anyone. He wasn't intimidated by their rank or authority. He was here for one reason only, the job. They briefed him on the target, a rogue general who had turned on the council, threatening to expose secrets that could destabilize their entire society. The council made it clear that this mission had no room for error. The general had to be eliminated, quickly and quietly. The hitman listened in silence, never interrupting, never asking for clarification. He took the data they provided, glanced at it briefly, and then, without a word, left the chamber. The council members were left sitting in an uncomfortable silence. One of them, the youngest on the council, finally spoke up. "Can we really trust him? I mean, he's human." The lead council member shook his head, though his expression betrayed his own doubts. "We have no choice. If anyone can do this, it's him." As the human made his way to his ship, he glanced at the data once more. It was a simple enough job. The target was well guarded, of course, and the planet's security was nothing to scoff at. But he had faced worse. The alien council didn't realize that their biggest mistake wasn't hiring a human. No, it was believing they understood what that meant. The hitman had worked for a lot of clients over the years, but something about these aliens always amused him. They were so advanced, so sure of their superiority. They thought their technology made them untouchable, that their rigid, controlled society was the peak of civilization. They couldn't comprehend the kind of adaptability, the kind of ruthlessness that humans were capable of when pushed. As he prepared his gear, his thoughts drifted back to the countless jobs he had completed. Some were brutal, others were simple. But they all had one thing in common. The employers never fully understood what they were unleashing when they brought a human into the equation. That was their downfall every time. The hitman touched down on the target planet, a gleaming world filled with towering structures and an impressive military presence. He had to give them credit, the aliens were thorough. The general was holed up in a heavily fortified bunker, surrounded by an army of elite soldiers. On paper, it looked like an impenetrable fortress. But to the hitman, it was just another job. He made his way through the city, blending in with the crowds. The aliens didn't give him a second glance. That was the beauty of working as a human among other species. They never expected a human to be as dangerous as he was. To them, humans were still primitive, unpredictable, yes, but not a true threat. That underestimation was exactly what he counted on. As he approached the target's location, he moved with the kind of calm precision that came from years of experience. There was no need for elaborate plans or high-tech gadgets. He relied on something far simpler: his instincts. The hitman had learned long ago that the best way to complete a mission was to rely on what had always worked: human ingenuity, and the willingness to do whatever it took to get the job done. The general's security was tight, as expected. The soldiers stationed around the bunker were heavily armed and alert, but they weren't prepared for him. In a matter of moments he was inside, moving through the halls with deadly efficiency. He didn't waste time. Every movement, every action was calculated to perfection. When he finally reached the general's quarters, the alien leader barely had time to register what was happening before the hitman struck. It was over in seconds. No grand speeches, no dramatic confrontation. Just swift, cold execution. The hitman stood over the body for a moment, then turned and left as quietly as he had come. The mission was complete, and by the time the general's guards realized what had happened, he was already gone. Back in the council chambers, the members waited nervously for word of the mission's outcome. They didn't have to wait long. The news came in: a clean job, no trace left behind, just as they had requested. But instead of relief, the council felt a creeping unease. They had hired the hitman to solve a problem, but now they couldn't shake the feeling that they had just created a much bigger one. For the human hitman, it was business as usual. Another contract completed, another client satisfied. But as he left the system, he couldn't help but wonder how long it would be before the aliens realized the full extent of what they had unleashed. Because one thing was certain: they wouldn't forget the day they met a human hitman. The hitman moved through the shadows of the city, his steps silent and purposeful. The streets were bustling with activity, the aliens going about their business, oblivious to the danger that now lurked among them. He was invisible to them, just another face in the crowd. That was part of the job, blending in, moving unnoticed. They had no idea they were already part of his plan. He had studied the layout of the city and the security protocols surrounding the general's bunker in great detail. Every inch of the place was designed to keep threats out, but that was assuming the threat would come from a direct assault, something big and obvious. The problem with security that tight was it was built to stop armies, not one man. The hitman wasn't here to fight his way through 100 guards. He was here to slip in, eliminate the target, and disappear without a trace. He reached a nondescript building a few blocks away from the bunker. From here, he could observe the guard rotations, the patrols, the patterns. There was always a pattern, even in systems that were supposed to be random. The aliens had set up layers of protection around their general, but they were following procedures, predictable procedures. They relied too much on their technology, believing that their sensors and automated defenses made them untouchable. What they didn't account for was human intuition, the ability to spot a flaw in the perfect plan. As the hitman watched the security feeds he had tapped into, he saw his opening. A small window, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, when the guards shifted positions just slightly out of sync. It was enough. He moved quickly, making his way toward the bunker's perimeter. The first layer of security was a laser grid, designed to detect any movement. He bypassed it easily, using a device he had customized for jobs like this, slipping through without setting off a single alarm. Once inside the perimeter, he found himself in the bunker's lower levels, where maintenance access was less guarded. It was here that he moved with the most caution. The walls had hidden cameras and motion sensors, but his training and experience had taught him how to move in ways that the sensors couldn't detect. To the untrained eye, it looked like luck, but it was years of honing his craft, understanding how to manipulate the technology the aliens relied so heavily upon. The guards were stationed at key points, but the hitman moved with a precision that defied their protocols. He wasn't following a direct path. Instead, he anticipated where they would be, moving through blind spots and timing his movements to the seconds. It was like a dance, one he had perfected over the years, slipping through tight security setups that had been considered impossible to breach. As he made his way deeper into the complex, the tension began to build. The further he went, the tighter the security became. It wasn't just the physical obstacles, there were psychological ones too. The general's men were alert, watching for any sign of danger, but they weren't looking for someone like him. They expected an attack, something loud and obvious, not a ghost moving silently through their defenses. He reached the general's private quarters, a heavily fortified room at the center of the bunker. There were guards stationed outside the entrance, their weapons ready, eyes scanning for anything suspicious. They had no idea that he was already inside, moving toward his target with surgical precision. His approach was as quiet as death, his presence unnoticed until it was too late. The general had been briefed on the possibility of assassination, but like the council, he underestimated what a human hitman could do. His room was a fortress, designed to withstand an assault, but it wasn't built to keep out someone like him. The hitman wasn't interested in brute force. He didn't need explosives or advanced weaponry. His greatest weapon was his mind, the ability to think beyond the parameters the aliens had set, to see the flaws in their plans and exploit them. He slipped into the room undetected, his presence unnoticed even by the most advanced security systems. The general was alone, reading over intelligence reports, oblivious to the fact that his life was about to end. The hitman didn't waste time. In less than a second, it was over. No struggle, no sound, just the cold efficiency of a professional doing his job. The general didn't even have time to react. The hitman stood there for a moment, surveying his work, then disappeared just as quickly as he had arrived. The job was done, and no one was any wiser. By the time the guards discovered the general's body, he was already gone, moving back through the city as if nothing had happened. The council had expected a clean job, and that's exactly what they got. But they hadn't expected the sheer level of skill and precision that the human hitman brought to the table. In their minds, humans were crude, unpredictable, dangerous because of their recklessness. They had no idea that the most dangerous thing about a human wasn't their impulsiveness. It was their ability to adapt, to learn, to exploit weaknesses that no one else could see. As the hitman made his way back to his ship, he knew that word of the general's death would spread quickly. The council would be satisfied, at least for now, but it wouldn't take long for them to realize just how precarious their situation had become. Hiring a human hitman had been a desperate move, one born out of necessity, but now they had to live with the consequences. Because once they had seen what a human was capable of, they couldn't unsee it. The hitman boarded his ship, leaving the planet behind as quietly as he had arrived. He didn't think about the job anymore. It was done, another contract fulfilled. But he couldn't help but wonder how long it would be before the council began to understand that by hiring him, they had invited something far more dangerous into their world than they ever could have imagined. They thought they had hired a weapon, but what they had really unleashed was the unpredictable force of humanity itself. The aftermath of the hit sent ripples of fear through the alien council. The death of the general was so swift, so clean, that it left them shaken. They had expected results, yes, but not this. They had hired the human for his efficiency, but seeing it in action was a different matter altogether. It was one thing to hear about what humans were capable of, it was another to witness it firsthand. The council members were now faced with a sobering realization. They had underestimated just how dangerous a human could be. The death of the general was supposed to stabilize their political structure, to remove a threat that could expose their secrets. But instead, it created a vacuum of fear and uncertainty. Other high-ranking officials within their ranks, those who had known about the hit, started looking over their shoulders. If a human hitman could infiltrate the most secure locations and eliminate a target without leaving a trace, what was stopping him from coming after them next? Rumors began to spread within the alien government. Whispers of the human's abilities grew with each retelling. Soldiers who had been stationed near the general's quarters began to speak of how they had felt an eerie chill before the hitman struck, how they hadn't seen or heard anything, but had somehow sensed his presence. Of course, none of them had any proof, but the stories were enough to stoke the fires of paranoia among the elite. One by one, council members started isolating themselves, tightening their own personal security, but it wasn't enough to calm their nerves. The realization hit them hard. They had unleashed something they couldn't control. The human wasn't bound by their rules or their technology. He moved in ways they couldn't predict, and that terrified them more than anything. They had thought they could handle him, but now they weren't so sure. It wasn't long before one of the council members, a lower-ranking one, but still significant, requested a private meeting. He claimed to have vital information about the general's assassination, something the others didn't know. The council granted him an audience, curious but cautious. What he revealed sent them into a deeper spiral of dread. The human hitman had completed his task with such precision, the council member said, because he had done more than just accept the contract. He had been watching them for far longer than they realized. The hit on the general wasn't just a job, it was a test. The council member explained that the hitman had been gathering intelligence on them the entire time, studying their weaknesses, mapping out not just the security of the bunker, but the very nature of their decision-making. The council was speechless. How could this be? The hitman had been hired for one job, one target. But now it seemed that he had been playing a much deeper game. They had assumed they were in control, that they were the ones giving the orders, but the human had been the one pulling the strings all along. Panic set in. The council began to debate whether they could even trust each other. Was this council member telling the truth, or was it just another layer of deception? Had the hitman already infiltrated their highest levels of government? Was he playing them against each other? As these thoughts festered, some members of the council began to take drastic measures. One fled the capital, retreating to an undisclosed location in hopes of escaping the unseen threat. Another doubled down on their security, surrounding themselves with private mercenaries who swore they could protect them from anything. But deep down, they all knew the truth. If the hitman wanted them dead, there was nothing they could do to stop him. The paranoia grew to such an extent that even the most rational minds among them started to crumble. Their society, once built on order and control, was now fracturing under the weight of their fear. The general's assassination had been the spark, and now everything was unraveling. The council had relied too heavily on their belief in technological superiority, in the idea that they were untouchable. The human hitman had shattered that illusion. And while the council scrambled to make sense of what had happened, the hitman remained silent, watching from the shadows. He had already completed his mission, but the fallout from his actions was proving to be far more valuable than the contract itself. He had known from the start that this job was more than just a simple hit. It was about sending a message, one that would echo throughout the galaxy. The aliens had always believed themselves to be superior, untouchable by anything or anyone beneath them. They had spent centuries building their empire, relying on their advanced technology and strict societal structures to maintain power. But the hitman had shown them that no amount of technology could protect them from the unpredictable nature of a human. In a way, it wasn't just a victory for him, it was a victory for humanity as a whole. Word began to spread across the galaxy about the hitman's work. Other species, who had long feared the alien council's dominance, started to take notice. If a single human could dismantle the council's power so effectively, what else were humans capable of? Those who had been subjugated or intimidated by the alien empire began to whisper of rebellion, emboldened by the hitman's actions. The council, now fractured and desperate, started to turn on each other. Some suggested hiring mercenaries to hunt the hitman down, but no one truly believed that would work. Others argued that they should try to negotiate with him, though they had no idea how to even begin such a conversation. After all, the hitman had done exactly what they had asked him to do, nothing more, nothing less. It wasn't his fault that their world was collapsing around them. In the end, the council was left paralyzed by indecision, too afraid to act, too paranoid to trust each other. The hitman had not only completed his mission, but he had also planted the seeds of their own destruction. The fear of what he represented, what all of humanity could represent, was enough to tear apart everything they had built. As the council's power crumbled, the hitman watched from afar, his work complete. The contract had been fulfilled, but the ripples would be felt for a long time. Humanity had shown, once again, that it could not be underestimated. The galaxy would never be the same. The council was in chaos. Every meeting now felt like a desperate attempt to maintain control, but the fractures were too deep. They had tried to regain some semblance of order, but the fear that had taken root was spreading like wildfire. They couldn't shake the sense that the Hitman was still out there, watching, waiting for his next move. And the worst part was, they didn't know who his next target would be, if there even was one. The uncertainty was killing them more effectively than any weapon could. In the days following the assassination, their once pristine capital had become a hive of whispers and paranoia. Every high-ranking official had beefed up their personal security, but none of them truly believed it would help. The rumors that circulated only fueled their dread. They heard stories of how the human hitman had taken out his target without setting off a single alarm, how no one saw him come or go, how the general had been found with no signs of struggle. It was as if the human had walked through walls. But what haunted them most was the realization that this wasn't an anomaly. This was what humans were capable of when pushed. Their unpredictability, their capacity for violence, and their ability to adapt were traits that no alien race had ever fully grasped. And now, with the legend of the Hitman growing, it was all anyone could talk about. The Council had hoped to keep the operation under wraps, but that was impossible. Word had spread like wildfire, and now the galaxy knew, a single human had brought an empire to its knees. It was more than just the general's death. It was the ripple effect that followed. The Council's internal structure had been shattered. Alliances that had taken centuries to build were now falling apart. Other species, once under the thumb of the Council, were beginning to see the cracks. They had feared the Council for so long, believed in its invincibility. But now, with the death of the General and the Council's inability to respond, they were questioning everything. For the Council, it was more than just an assassination, it was the start of their downfall. And they knew it. They had unleashed the human hitman, thinking they could control the outcome. But they hadn't anticipated the long-term effects. They hadn't expected that this one act would cause their entire system to unravel. They had thought they were invincible, protected by their advanced technology and rigid hierarchy. But the Hitman had shown them how fragile their power truly was. There was talk of calling a Galactic Summit, an attempt to show unity, to convince the galaxy that the Council was still strong. But deep down, every member knew it was too late for that. Their enemies had already smelled blood. Rebellions were being whispered about on the outskirts of their empire. Factions that had once been loyal were now questioning their allegiance. And all because of a single human. The Council, once the pinnacle of galactic order, had become a shadow of its former self. They were no longer the ones pulling the strings. The Hitman had proven that. He had done exactly what they had asked of him, but the unintended consequences were devastating. Every day, they sat in their chambers, trying to figure out how to regain control, but it was slipping further away with each passing moment. And the Hitman? He had moved on. To him, it was just another job. The Council's internal struggles weren't his concern. He had been paid, and the job was done. The human wasn't the type to gloat or dwell on his work. He left the aftermath for others to deal with, knowing full well that the chaos he had sown was far more valuable than the contract itself. But the galaxy didn't see it that way. The Hitman had become a symbol, a representation of what humanity could do. Species that had once dismissed humans as primitive or inconsequential were now looking at them with a new sense of respect and fear. If one human could do this, what could an entire army of them accomplish? The Council wasn't just dealing with internal unrest anymore. They were facing a potential galactic shift in power, one that they hadn't seen coming. And it was all because they had underestimated humanity. They had viewed humans as unpredictable, yes, but they hadn't realized how dangerous that unpredictability could be when combined with cold, calculated precision. And now, they were paying the price. In the dark corners of the galaxy, where criminal organizations and warlords thrived, the Hitman's legend grew. There were stories of how he could take out a target without anyone even knowing he had been there. Tales of how entire governments feared him, how the most secure locations in the galaxy were nothing more than open doors to him. He had become more than just a hitman, he had become a force. The Council was left to watch helplessly as the galaxy shifted around them. They had spent so long at the top, believing they were untouchable, and now they were being torn apart from the inside. The Hitman had done more than just kill a general. He had exposed the Council's greatest weakness, their inability to adapt. They were stuck in their rigid structures, relying on outdated methods to maintain control. But the galaxy had changed, and so had its players. As the Council crumbled, humanity's reputation soared. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson: never underestimate a human. They were capable of far more than anyone had ever imagined. And the Hitman, in his quiet, ruthless way, had shown them exactly what that meant. The Council would never recover. The fear of what humans could do had already taken root, and now their empire, once the pinnacle of galactic power, was teetering on the edge of collapse. They had tried to control the narrative, but the Hitman had written a new one for them. And now, they were nothing more than a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you underestimate humanity. The galaxy would never be the same again,